Today we're going to be talking about Neon Genesis Evangelion episode 25. Matty boy, what are your immediate pressing thoughts of this episode?
I don't know. I hate it, but I kind of am interested in it. But I feel like I got another more recap episode. I don't know what I felt about it. I'm interested to know what's going on, and I'm also pissed off that I don't currently know what's really happening. I feel confused.
Yeah, it's an interesting experience for sure. It kind of reminds me, just your reaction there, of and I wish I could think of where this thing's from. It's like, I hate your guts, but god damn it, do I respect you.
Yes.
That's kind of how I feel about this episode, where I'm like, okay, yeah. Now we're all of a sudden in a deep dive psychoanalysis of all these characters, and again, more pieces are falling into place where you're like, I see why you are the way you are. And now that I'm told kind of what to look for in your character, I see how certain actions of yours could have been motivated or, viewed. But it is also an interesting one where it's like, we're in the last two episodes and now we're filling in this gap. It almost feels like in some cases it might not have organically been explored well enough in the series. And now it's like, here we are at the end. Throw everything else on the wall just so they know why this character is so traumatized and effed up like they are. It's a lot. But so what is your, I guess, an immediate takeaway from this? I mean, they tell you in the episode kind of what's happened or happening, but this is a very abstract episode, which I mentioned before, and we're kind of going between what's happening in the real world and then what's happening on a more metaphysical sort of level.
Yeah, and that's really where I was watching it thinking, is this really the real world, or is this what they're wanting me to believe, or is this, I don't know. And I guess, if I'm taking it at the level, I mean, how much do we want to get into the episode here, but how much am I taking as yeah, that's fact, this is happening, people are dead,
right,
in this depiction.
Yes. And what I would say, first of all, just as we try to break down and assess this, I felt like I needed a little bit of juice here to help with this, because just trying to process this and wrap my head around it, I was like, I need to break down my own internal barriers a little bit here to try and make sense of this.
Get that AT field at 10%.
Yep. So we open on immediately a interesting level here. We're opening with title cards, basically saying one's reason for being here. It's okay to exist. Case 1, the case of Shinji Ikari. And so you're immediately off the bat, you're like, huh? The last thing we saw was Kaoru's head popping off and falling into the LCL. And then Shinji talking with Misato. They were cleaning Unit 1. And now we're here. How did we get here? What's happening? But before
do I hate this title question?
Yeah.
Oh, it just the snap back every 2 seconds, and you really have to be reading rather quickly to be following this episode. There's a number of times where I had to go back and be like, all right, what did that just say? Hold on.
Yep.
It's so fast, which I don't know. Maybe that's just because the subtitles are quicker than when you're just seeing this giant word on screen, and they're just so small. But I don't know. I felt like it was kind of hard to keep up with the conversation that was happening. Yeah. I wish it was more of a voiceover type thing, but that's all we got.
I agree. So this is talking about a boy who wished for his own death, a boy who granted his wish. So boy who wished for his own death, Kaoru. Boy who granted his wish, Shinji. The final angel is gone, and yet Shinji Ikari still agonizes over his death. And he is tormented by this question. It repeats, I believe, 5 times, asking, why did you kill him? And Shinji's kind of, as he's wrestling with this decision, trying to reconcile this, it's as he's fighting back against this question of why did you kill him? I feel like his answers are valid every time. He was an angel. He was trying to kill us. Everyone I know and love would have died if I had not done what I did. But it's it just keeps hammering away on him. And this is kind of an immediate trend with this, as we're looking at these characters, like they're confronted by whether it's their insecurities or sort of the truth of themselves, it just hammers away and like breaks them down until they finally like get to whatever's underneath the surface of like how they actually feel about something or view something, whether it's themselves or their own actions, things like that. So yeah, it's Shinji immediately trying to cope with his decision to kill Kaoru, and we have Rei appearing alongside him, basically pointing out that like, Kaoru and I are essentially the same. Like they're like me. So like, why was his life less valid? Did you think there was any sort of significance to this idea that like Rei is the first person to appear to kind of talk with Shinji?
Man, that really gets into like what's happening, but no, not necessarily. I mean, I guess that does make sense because he does have an awareness of like them being the same, which makes sense. But yeah, it's like there's no question about like, oh, well, why does his life seem less valuable? It's like, it's not that it seems less valuable, it's that he's literally pushing the end world button, whereas you're trying to help us not do that. Right. So, I mean, pretty obvious of why you're keeping.
But both of those are respective to their own species. So, like, Shinji is his end-world button is not like the Earth blowing up; it's humanity being wiped out. Kaoru is yes, humanity dies off, but angels, the intended successors of the world, who were supposed to inherit it originally, would be able to actually flourish as was intended. So it's like, even in the last episode, Kaoru talking to Sele, talking about like, you're talking about hopes. That's the Lilland's hope. That's your hope. That's not my hope. That's not my whatever. Like both of them are fighting for their own survival of their species. It's just that Shinji's side has all the leverage as far as like numbers, but like in that moment, it's down to just like two people. One side has to lose because either Kaoru dies here or he's going to do what he has to do. But obviously there was that whole bait and switch with Adam and Lilith, and it kind of messed up that plan, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes down to like, if you're granted the choice of, hey, do I, dying to save the people that you love is a different thing, and I think that that's an act that people can follow, knowing that there's an outcome that they want to see. But if you think about everyone in Shinji's life, regardless of how effed up people are to him, like with his dad, there are people that he genuinely does love. Like Misato, I would say, is one of those people for sure.
Yeah.
And he cares about his friends, even though he hasn't seen them. And him choosing to not kill Kaoru, it kills them all. It kills everyone he's ever known in his life. He's known this guy for one day. Now, the relationship that they've had in a very short period of time, and whether it's truthful or not, like a certain level of like almost manipulation into like, hey, I'm going to give you everything you've ever wanted in life as far as like this affirmation that you've been seeking. It's like, as good as that is, it's not real to him because it's so fleeting. It's like, yeah, you did give me these things that I've wanted, but you're not a real person. Yeah. So I don't know. I think there's a different level of like, I don't know how to think about that.
Yeah, I get what you're going for. That's valid. One thing to sort of keep in mind, revisit with the thought process here. You remember this concept they introduced a couple different times in the series, the idea of the self within the hearts of others. So like Shinji, when Rei is appearing to him, it's not actually Rei, it's Rei as he knows her, essentially.
Yeah.
And so anytime somebody is like confronted with a person, it's their perception of that person confronting them. Which, we're going to get into that in a minute, but Shinji is then speaking with Misato. There's also something you could say, if you want to try and say bigger conclusions from it, the order in which the people appear to them is also relevant. Misato then appears doesn't appear. We jump back to almost that conversation at the end of the previous episode with Shinji and Misato talking about Kaoru's death. And I guess that's kind of trying to signify that, like, whatever is happening happened like moments after that conversation was kind of what I take away from it. Almost like the last sort of thing he kind of remembers before ending up here. That was my interpretation of it, because I didn't notice anything different in the conversation. I thought maybe there would be like a different line of dialogue or an extra little part on the end, and I didn't really notice anything of that. I don't know if maybe you did, but Shinji's kind of examining this idea of like why he's like this. He talks about he was afraid of his father because he abandoned him. He doesn't want people to hate him and abandon him as well. And then we cut to a cool shot with Shinji just looking out over this like cloudy sort of abyss. And I think this is a sort of metaphor for his own mind, essentially, at this point. How, you have like these pieces that are kind of like growing through or like reaching up through the vast expanse of like this fog, but you really can't make sense of everything you're seeing. And I feel like that's sort of where Shinji's mind was at even before the last episode, just completely out of sorts about everything, not sure what to think or anything like that. But I feel like they were trying to go very multi-level there, and I'm like, I get what you're saying on the surface, but if I had to break it down and define all the things of it, I feel like I would probably struggle just a little bit. Do you draw anything specific from that?
I honestly didn't really know what to take of that whole scene. So I don't even know if I drew as much as you did from it. I'd have to kind of think back on it a little bit more, and I feel, I don't know exactly what my thoughts were on that. I was just like, where are we now, and what is happening?
Well, how about our abrupt shift from that as Unit 1 appears and grabs Shinji in his fist in the exact same animation and style of how Unit 1 grabs Kaoru. So it's literally like the repeated animation, so I'm sure the animators love that, not having to put as much work into that scene. But it's now Shinji in Unit 1's hands, and I feel like there's a sort of parallel there, as Shinji's been trying to figure out, like, should I have been the one to die or should it have been Kaoru? And we know that with Shinji's character, he's kind of like, he doesn't want to live, but he's essentially afraid of dying. And so, like, yeah, it would be easier for him had it been the other way, because he doesn't want to live with this idea of what he would have to do if it were the other way, but he also doesn't have like the willpower to do it himself. So it's like, for him, he probably does wish, like, I wish it had been Unit 2 grabbing me and Kaoru making this decision for me, essentially, where I don't have to do anything. But it's interesting that just with how Shinji is so, I guess, disconcerted with everything with Nerve and Unit 1, like, even though Unit 1, and he knows this too, literally has like his mother's soul in it and everything, he's still viewing it in this context like it's sort of the enemy, the sort of tool that's making him do these things he doesn't want to do, because the only reason he pilots an Eva is because that's the only way people will care about him or love him or anything. And he resents that because he doesn't like what it makes him do, but he's so starved for this approval and everything that he'll do it anyway. So it's there's interesting sort of layers to that, and that resentment towards, I think, both parents kind of comes through in that.
Yeah, and I mean, do we think that his decision to kill Kaoru was influenced by that need for like affirmation? Because I would say in that moment, especially with how long that scene is stressed before like the actual kill happens, this is, seemingly him without anyone in his ear making this decision for himself. And I think when he comes to the conclusion that like he needs to die, that's his understanding, or at least that's his decision to save the people that he loves.
Yeah.
And to realize that, the same thing with his fear of death. It's like, if he's afraid of death, not killing Kaoru streamlines him to that. Like, he's dead immediately.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's valid. So it's probably, like you said, going down to that angle of trying to protect them and like understanding like this is what he's supposed to do. This is what he's been conditioned, sort of told, like, it's us or them. And Kaoru's even saying that as much as well. Like, so it's like, this person is every affirmation of value of myself and seems to love and care about me, but they are this thing. And he's even saying it's like, one of our sides is going to die here. And regardless of if Kaoru is saying, like, I've come to the conclusion that it should be you and your kind who survive, it's still facing him with that thing of like, there's no scenario in which he and Kaoru are able to like go on. Like, one of them has to die in that moment. And Shinji's like, okay, Kaoru is the last of his kind. If he dies here, I have to bear that weight, but I will be the only person that mourns him. If his side wins out, everybody I know and have ever cared about goes away, including people who have no blame or whatever in any of this. So yeah, it's definitely broader than that. And then we have Asuka making her appearance as Shinji is again talking about kind of like why he pilots Unit 1, just so people will care about him, and that's the only reason. And Asuka kind of appears and just immediately like puts him on blast. She's back in old vintage form, not the borderline comatose Asuka that she was sitting in the bathtub. Like, she's got her fire and everything back. And she's just straight up calling him like a liar and an idiot, essentially. Like, he's lying to himself, like basically saying like, you don't do this because people will only love you if you do that. It's like, you're kind of like people pleasing, a form of manipulation. You do this to incite them to care about you. Yeah. It's not so much that like, this is that, like, you want to be seen, you're desperate to have this recognition and everything. And that's why you do it, but you can't even be honest with yourself about that. And then Rei shows up and basically goes like, bitch, isn't that what you do? Like, I'm pretty sure that's like you to a T, which again gets back to that whole Shinji Asuka two sides of the same coin thing. Do you want to pick
up with... At this time I wrote, Rei even gives Asuka shit in Shinji's imagination, which I got a good kick out. Now, what is actually happening, or at least what I think is actually happening, I would say it's different than after I wrote that statement. But then we go on to, is it Asuka in the fetal position next?
Yes, it's the case of Asuka Langley Soryu. So I'll let you pick that up there.
So, and I think I'm just going to get into like how I'm viewing this after I've seen the episode and kind of know at least my perception of what's going on.
Yeah, lay it out. Let me know what you think, and I can interject with a clarification if necessary.
Well, she's in her Ava. I can't remember if she's suited or not. Is she?
She is.
So I would love to have seen, or I would love to see in the next episode, which is probably not going to happen, but I wish it would. So we get into has the Misato Rasuko thing probably not happened? Yeah, we don't know about that yet, but they're dead. So spoiler alert for anyone that hasn't watched this, you're a dummy. Anyways, so they're dead. So I like to assume that at this point, Asuka has tried to, like, has maybe realized what's going on and tried to fight, possibly. More realistically, she has probably been told to get into the Ava. She's probably been told to do a task, and then they figured out a way to essentially dump her in the ocean and realize that she can't pilot this thing. But that's also, it's like, she had to have some level of piloting to get this moving again. I mean, it wasn't functional, right?
Yeah. If you're going off of the end of that's some of the confusion, because if you're going off of what we saw at the end of last episode, it looked like Shinji and Unit 1 destroyed Unit 2. Like, to whatever extent you can kill an Ava, like, again, it is an artificial human, so it is alive. So it's unclear if it actually killed Unit 2, but we've seen them have like their heads blown up before and like repaired. So it's almost like Avas are like a Frankenstein's monster. We've talked about how they've cannibalized parts for Avas from other Avas. So I don't know if it's that Unit 2 was actually killed, destroyed, just, incapacitated, whatever. But it did look like Unit 1 and Shinji destroyed Unit 2 with the prog knife in that fight at the end of last episode.
Yeah, so a lot of questions at this point. What I wish would happen next episode is that Asuka figures out what's going on. She goes into like, she gets herself back, she gets her sync back, and she tries to like fight this situation that's happening and, doesn't end up winning, which leads to this devastated scene we're seeing here. But I would love it if we got that scene where it's like, oh, she's back, even though it like ended in a loss. But that's how I wish this was going. I don't really know how she ends up here, but I mean, plummeting to her death at this point, can no longer control because of this loss, or she's in the same situation she was earlier.
Yeah,
but
and this is our first glimpse of reality outside of this sort of metaphysical plane that so much of this episode takes place. Yeah, because we see like in some big body of water, and as she's talking about how Unit 2 like isn't even responding to her, like the dumb thing doesn't even work, it's broken basically. I noticed like, well, inside the cockpit she's in a fetal position, but then Unit 2 is in a mirroring position in the body of water we saw. So it is on some level responding. It's just like she's so broken she can't even realize that like it is, I guess, sort of in sync with her. Yeah. I think she just can't see past how broken she feels at this point. So yeah, it's seemingly saying kind of what you're alluding to. Like she tried to respond and go into combat or something to address or help with the situation, and something didn't work, and it just made her immediately kind of come apart again. Like I can't do anything, even when I like finally got motivated to try and do something, it didn't matter, or something like that. That seems to be what it's alluding to.
Yeah. At this time, she's not dead, right? She's alive.
Yep. And we get Rei.
Which leads me to like being even more confused with the scenes that we get later where, we have Asuka and all these other people in Shinji's imagination. And I'm trying not to jump ahead. I'll stick to where we are right now.
Yeah, stick where we are, and I can give context as needed.
We get to Rei's weird floating heads and conversations with her younger self.
Before the case of Rei Ayanami, Rei is still talking to Asuka while Asuka is in the fetal position in Unit 2. And she's saying that Asuka wants others to confirm her identity because she's afraid of being alone. Asuka snaps at this and says, "Shut up, shut up, shut up." She's afraid she'll lose herself and if others go away. And her quote, Asuka's quote toward Rei is, "Shut up, I don't need someone who's like a doll to tell me all of that." Again, we know why a doll is like the worst thing Asuka can think to call somebody, essentially. And this episode only further reinforces that later on, where you're just like, my God, the worst stepmother ever. Getting ahead of it. But then we go into the case of Rei Ayanami.
So if she's fighting someone, it's got to be Rei. Because there's no more angels left, so it's got to be Rei, which would make sense why Rei is the first person on each of their minds. That makes me question where Shinji is. I mean, I think by the, my first time around, and I'm starting to second guess myself, but after we see the whole, death scene from Rasuko and Misato, I'm thinking that this had something to do with human instrumentality, that they had to kill them in order for their like consciousnesses to go together. But now I'm like that I'm on the wrong path here, because Asuka's still alive at this point. So I really need to second guess that. But yeah, I think Rei is probably the enemy at this point.
Interesting.
At the charge of Gendo. Which makes sense, because he's saying this is the moment that I prepared you for.
Yep. So in the case of Rei Ayanami, we open up with Rei talking amongst her other selves. So it's Rei 3, hospital bandaged up and everything, and she's asking, "Who am I? Who are you? Who are you really?" It's a conversation between Rei 1, 2, and 3, and they basically all come to the conclusion that they're all Rei Ayanami. They address it as the objects referred to as Rei Ayanami. Rei 3 asks how this is possible, and they basically conclude that it's because they're all viewed and effectively just they're defined by others as Rei Ayanami. And Rei 1 who was always the bitchiest Rei, right? The little 5-year-old who was like, "You're just an old hag. He doesn't need you." Always had the most piss and vinegar. She's telling Rei 3 that, you know, she has a false heart within herself and that her memories or whatever are forgeries. Rei 3 says no, because my personality and everything is shaped by my experiences, and so in that way I'm unique to each of you. And it's kind of like this idea of, and that's actually an interesting concept, where you have 3 clones of the same people made at different times, and they're kind of like deciding, like, are we all the same or are we unique to each other in some way? Which I guess you could say, like, that's no different than like having identical twins, and are we unique to one another? Of course. But yeah, I thought this was kind of an interesting conversation. You've got that floating, creepy, distorted Rei head as well in there, where it's just like, oh, more nightmare fuel. Okay, thank you. But Rei 1 points out that because she's made with a forged soul by Gendo Ikari, she's merely a fake object pretending to be human. And she says, inside you, there's an impenetrable abyss. Your true self is there. And they're just kind of going back and forth on this for a moment. But what's interesting, and you got into it there with the Gendo thing, we learn how Rei 3 at least, views Gendo at this point. She wants to die, and she's longed for death in the void because she's died 3 times now. But Gendo won't let her die. He needs her, so he makes sure that she's always there through, you know, cloning her and like this sort of idea of like the reincarnation, putting the same Lilith soul back into her, however that happens. And she notes she won't be here forever, though, and eventually she will be abandoned by him, which, again, fits the Gendo MO perfectly. He uses people until he has no more use for them, then he discards them. And she used to long for that day when he just cast her aside, but now it's here, essentially, or like any moment now, and she's actually afraid of that. And so that's her resentment towards Gendo of the, why won't you just let me die and like let me be done? Which I actually think it really cool recontextualizes episode 23, her fight in the elevator argument with Asuka, when Asuka says, you'd probably kill yourself if Commander Ikari told you to, wouldn't you? And Rei's like, yeah. Asuka takes that as like, you're pathetic. But she's like, no, like if he let me die, I'd celebrate that. That's what I want.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, like, don't you understand? Like, that's what I want. So I thought that was cool how that kind of recontextualized that, where I was like, oh, okay, yeah. Now that seems like a actually kind of reasonable response from you. Whereas at the time you're just like, God, Rei, have some sense of like self. It was, you were annoyed with her a little bit the first time, but now you kind of see it and you're like, okay, yeah. If I knew that I was being brought back and I was having to go through this, I mean, we've talked about before, the life of an Eva pilot is just miserable. She's not treated like she's a person by most. She doesn't know how to interact with others because she's not socially conditioned to it. She's aged up, as we know. It's not like she gets to like live her whole life from birth to 14, 15, whatever she is to do this. She's like, all right, you're awake. All right, you're already 15. Go do this now. And it's just like, yeah, that's got to be a pretty miserable experience. And then Gendo appears before her, saying that the time has come and that she existed for today. So they are going to move forward with Gendo's plan at this point. Gendo Versele, looks like Gendo has seemingly won out, as this episode would seem to indicate. But again, we got another episode, but we get a message on the screen that the instrumentality of humanity begins.
There's one more thing I wanted to talk about with Rei that I thought was an interesting conversation. Is young Rei is telling herself that she fails to acknowledge, it sounds to me at least, like young Rei is telling her that she fails to acknowledge the angel inside of herself and that she's almost afraid to embrace that side.
Yes.
Which I get that maybe this is, I don't know exactly how activating that side is possible from Gendo's perspective, but it's like, my assumption is that he has to do something to make her make that decision. Now, maybe that's just a conscious effort on her part, and she's like, nope, guess I gotta kill everybody now. But it's like she's developed these relationships with people, which she discusses too. Like, I'm not the same person because I've had these experiences and I've made these, decisions and paths that have led me to be the person I am now. So regardless of our DNA being the same, like my experiences are my own, which makes me question, like, would she kill these people if she was asked?
I think it's a matter of, I think of it as the sleeping giant, if you will, within you. As long as it's asleep, you're in control. But if it wakes up, you are not you anymore, and you don't have a say.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I view it. Yeah, that's a good point too as well. I glossed over that, so thank you for bringing that up.
Do you like how I'm figuring out the episode as we're talking about it? I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, now
Yeah.
I see where I'm at right now.
It's a very confusing episode. You've seen it, I think, just the one time, obviously. The first time viewing these last two episodes, I was with everybody else where I was like, what did I just watch? But after seeing everything, even just of the original series and End of Evangelion, I took a greater appreciation of it. And the more times I've rewatched it, the more times I'm like, this is a weird direction, but I do respect you going outside the box. Ava was made as a way of circumventing the tropes and expectations of like the mecha anime. Like it's not Gundam Wing. And so like everything feels like it's building up to this huge, battle or something. And instead we're going inside and we're going like into these characters' minds and this idea in a very metaphysical way of like what human instrumentality looks like, what the experience is. And so I think that's a ballsy decision that I think Hideki Anno maybe had too much optimism would be better received because it was not a popular decision. His own fan bases vandalized his studio and like death threats and shit. And it was basically like, oh yeah, dude, I think there were fires set at his studio. Like it was like a thing where they like pressed him to make a new ending. And the End of Evangelion came out a year and a half later. And that's why I said like, it's almost not like his revenge thing. It's a stunningly beautiful work, but it does very much have all right, if you want to see shit, you're going to see shit. And it's just like it's intense in a whole new level than what you get in the series. And the series has its oh shit moments, like Rei 1 getting strangled. You're like, oh my god. But like this is like, oh. And so yeah, it's almost like it's a very visceral, like there's different things that he does in his commentaries where it's kind of like trying to like talk about this idea of his own almost relationship against the fan base of his work. And like that comes out stronger as it comes through. So, but that's a different conversation we'll get to.
Well, let's take a quick, small, tiny little sidetrack on that.
Sure.
People, it's a show.
Mm-hmm.
When you go to a sporting event, and when you yell at somebody, which I did recently, and I got yelled at in a really funny way, but anyone listening to this, for the 5 of you that are listening, it's a show. It's a show. Yeah. These are life events with other human beings that have, their own drives and their own thoughts and feelings. And who are you to try to like attack someone for some small little thing that has no effect on your life? Like, Get over yourself, move on. It's a very small thing. I'm sorry you don't like it. Do something else. Watch a different show. Like, it's not your show. You didn't make it. Anyways, we're getting on. Shinji, outlines, body, go.
Yes. The instrumentality of humanity begins. We open with the question of, do you love me? So Shinji is sitting there naked. He's not in a fetal position because he's sitting. He's not like laying on his side. He's sitting on his butt, but he's naked, cradling his knees to his chest. And he's talking about this black abyss and how he feels like the lines of his body are vanishing and that he likes it. Like he mentions like, it's kind of like when he was in the direct sea, and it's like this almost like warm, comforting feeling, even though he feels like himself as an individual is fading away. And Gendo appears telling us essentially like this idea of humanity, this idea that everyone is returning to this void as instrumentality begins. He's like, no, that's incorrect. It's simply returning everything to its beginning. To which I'm like, Gendo, who the fuck are you talking to right now? How do you know that we are observing this and not part of this? Like, it's a weird fourth wall break to me. But I'm like,
Yeah,
all right,
very fourth wall.
I feel like they just didn't know how else to like explain that. Like, well, of course that's what Shinji would think, but like, how do we explain to the viewer that that's not the truth? So we'll just have Gendo break the fourth wall for a second, staring at the camera, saying like, no, incorrect. It's simply everything returning to its beginning. Then we see Risuko dead and floating in the LCL near Lilith. She has a bullet hole through her back. Whether she was shot in the back, shot in the belly, we don't know. But very much dead, face down, floating in the water of the LCL. We then see Misato also dead in a pool of her own blood, looking like she's just been shot in the chest in a corridor, maybe at Nerve HQ, we assume. And so it's just like, oh, this is another glimpse of the real world, because this is not this weird empty space or whatever of the this metaphysical world, or as it later kind of appears almost like a stage, which again feels like a sort of subtle commentary. This is a glimpse of the real world and what's happening as instrumentality is beginning. And so you're like, wow, humanity is not doing well if they've lost Risuko, Misato, and Asuka is in fetal position at the bottom of an ocean or whatever right now. This is not good. And so as we're going through this, we get a shift. Let me find where I was in my notes here. Okay, yeah. Gendo is telling us that our hearts will become one and we will achieve eternal peace. There's nothing more to it than that. He also mentions returning to the mother who had been lost to this world, which is Lilith. And that connects back to when Kaoru was talking with Seele last episode at that lake, and Lilith being the progenitor of humanity. So, yes, Lilith is the mother that was lost to this world from which humanity descended. And Gendo says all of this is a return to that mother, which feels Freudian, I guess. I don't know what it's going to. It's like, so are you saying we all came from Lilith and we're going back to Lilith? What does that look like? We all are turning into like this singular consciousness with the lines of ourselves basically melting away into one whatever. Again, you think about like the visual. I heard your AC kick on. You think about I was like, what the fuck is happening? You think about like the visual of, again, at the time we were told it was Adam, but at the bottom of Terminal Dogma or whatever it was, how when you had the legs cut off and the LCL is bleeding down into this lake, essentially, basically, I guess saying it's continuously bleeding and just slowly filled up this little lake. And so the idea, I guess, is like, okay, there were little like legs growing out of the nubs that the legs had been before. So like, is this like a physical return to the body rather than like an emotional or spiritual one, I guess? I don't know. That's kind of left open-ended, but that was sort of what I took away, a more literal thing of it there. But in this conversation then that we get between Misato and Risuko, yes, they're dead. So I guess all these consciousnesses are blending together, and yet they're somehow included, even though I would have guessed they died. I could see Risuko being she's face down in the LCL, like would have died in the LCL, so maybe. But like Misato is just in a corridor, so I don't know how she's there. But they're having this conversation. Misato is like, wait, this is what instrumentality is? And Risuko says, yes, we all have parts of our hearts that are forever empty. The parts we lost. All people fear the darkness within their hearts, and they press on hoping to eradicate it. But as long as there are people, that darkness will never go away. And Misato's basically just like, you're forcing people to care about each other, which always makes me laugh as a line just because it sounds so ridiculous.
It like, sounds so ridiculous.
There's no way you could say that line seriously and have it sound good. No matter what, it's going to sound like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm the bad guy, I guess. But she's like, you're forcing people to care about each other. And then Risuko flips the script, just like Rei flipped the script on Asuka, and she says, that's what you want, though, isn't it? And we move into the case of Misato Katsuragi. Do you want to pick it up from there?
Yeah, I gotta figure out where the heck I am at this point.
Do you want me to buffer for a minute?
Yeah, buffer me.
Buffer. I will buff the shit out. All right. So yeah, this is going very interestingly at this point. We're clearly delving into the minds of these individual characters. And it's like, as a character is pushed to the forefront to be examined, all of the perceptions of the people around them, even though we're seeing the same people, we're seeing them being confronted by their own perception of that person. So like Shinji, when Rei confronted him, was not actually Rei, it was the Rei within himself as he understands her. I think there's a point at which a pivot happens, because I do think it's the projection of Asuka confronting him later on. But when Asuka then takes the forefront of like this self-righteous thing, and then Rei flips the script on her, that's the actual Asuka being... It's weird. It's like you have these people, and we see this later on. We see a point where there's two Shinjis on camera, and it's because one is Shinji and one is a projection of Shinji in someone else's mind. And so it's kind of hard to tell at times, like, who is actually who and who is a projection of someone, and then from which person's projection are they?
Yeah, that's, dear God, my brain is just gonna, I feel like it was kind of melting as I'm trying to figure out this episode.
Yep.
And I really wanted to watch the next one just because I was like so frustrated with my lack of understanding.
Yeah.
But I didn't write a ton of notes on exactly what's happening with Misato's background, but it's very similar to Asuka's, which is funny to me that they were in such opposition with one another. It's like, from Asuka's perspective, she's like angry with Misato all the time, and from Misato's perspective, she just like doesn't understand what's going on. But when you see Misato's background, it's very similar to Asuka's, which makes you think, like, why didn't they have like a bond? It's like they hated each other because of their similarities almost.
I think it kind of tells you, to an extent, Misato suppresses her true self because it's not the self she wants to put forward. And so if she saw those parallels, and I agree, I think to some extent she did, I think she kind of like neglected it because of that, just like she neglected her own inner self and what she felt her true nature was.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why she was a good caretaker for Shinji and not for Asuka. They had, again, like you said, kind of similar traumas, not exactly the same, but similar. And I think that made her maybe view it to an extent of like, well, here's how I dealt with it. Here's how I wanted to be treated. I'm going to do the same for her. And then I'm just not going to really like focus or fixate on that. I'm not going to try to solve Asuka. I will try to solve Shinji. I will, if he seems out of sorts or down or upset, I will talk to him. I will go as far as to try and comfort him in a scene that people apparently think is controversial.
But I will expand on that a little bit. It does make sense that she would want to get down with Shinji. Do you know why?
Go for it.
Because both of them want to F their dads.
Yeah.
They've got that in common.
It's a similar energy, and they're just like, samesies. All right, let's go, and just start peeling off the clothes.
Yep. No. Strip show.
Yeah.
So she's talking to Kaji. Well, I guess she's not talking to
hold
Kaji
on.
at this point.
Before Kaji shows up, so the case of Misato opens with Shinji appearing and saying that his heart isn't just within himself, but within Misato's as well. She agrees and acknowledges the same is true the other direction. And then Shinji says in order to find himself, he needs to interact with many different people and then look within himself and examine basically how those people he interacts with, his perception of them, and how truthfully, I guess, that resonates. And then he asks Misato what she wishes for. We then cut to young Misato here, and she's talking about she needs to be a good girl to help mommy because daddy's always gone. But she doesn't want to be like mommy because mommy's always crying. She doesn't want her mom to cry, so she needs to be that good girl. And maybe if she's the good girl, daddy will come home. Only she hates her father for that exact reason. She wants to be the good girl so that he'll be around because she doesn't want her mom to cry, but she hates him because he's not around anyway. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword, I guess. Also note, when we're seeing young Misato here, it's kind of like a taped up photograph, like kind of like taped back together. And this actually mirrors And I actually saw this observation from another platform. I think it was one of the people who actually did another Evangelion podcast. They were talking about how this mirrors, in a more literal sense, her car at the first couple episodes, how it was like literally held together with like scotch tape. It's kind of mirroring that, how she like her car like her is held together just so delicately, like not secure at all in all of this.
Mhm.
But I thought that was kind of cool. I was like, yeah, yes, go on, yes. Yeah, I think that might have been the Full Impact podcast, but it was something as I saw someone like mention in a comment and then refer back to their own episode, and I was like, I might have to check that out. But yes, so that's a note there, and then she gets into this idea where she's kind of like rejecting this sense. She talks about how she hates everything. She's tired of staying clean and pretty. She wants to be dirty, essentially.
She says, I want to see myself soiled. I want to see myself dirty. And the immediate next note that I wrote was, this is the Neon Genesis I wanted.
You're like penciling in, through human instrumentality, my threesome might happen.
There's still hope.
I don't think, Kaji's here, but like it's not like Kaji's here. I think it's the projection Kaji that's here. But
I'll take Misato and Risuko as a duo too. You know, we'll keep it whatever we got room for right now.
So yeah, she wants to be soiled. She wants to see herself dirty. She's just tired of being this good girl. And Risuko asks her if that's why she slept with Kaji. To which Misato, again, this is one of those cases where it's like you're confronted with your own sort of insecurity or whatever, and even as you're pressing against it, even if you're giving valid answers, it's like unless you get to the heart of your answer with what you're saying, unless you admit some truth of some kind to yourself, you're still having to fight back and push against this resistance. And so Risuko is basically like pushing back, like, even as Misato saying like, well, no, I loved him. Like it's not the same as like that. And that makes me sound essentially. He was kind to me. And we then cut to their moment of when they're having sex that we saw. And Shinji is now in the room and he just looks disgusted at everything. He's focused. He's like, yeah. Like he does not seem like he likes him. Like maybe he did like Kaoru. I don't know. He doesn't seem like he's too excited with whatever he's seeing here. And Misato's horrified that Shinji is seeing this. She doesn't want him to see her this way. And she's kind of being asked like, well, if this really is like love and a beautiful thing, then like, why would you be embarrassed about this? And she's just like, because it is embarrassing. Like, I don't need him to see me like this. And I kind of get what that's going for, you know, like if this is like a genuine expression of love, then why would it be embarrassing? But it's like, yeah, nobody wants to be seen, and particularly from the point of view of whoever's sitting at the foot of the bed. It's like, yeah, that's not the most flattering angle, maybe. But
the guy in the corner.
Yeah. So it's I get kind of what they're going for here, and that sort of seems like this is the theme of Instrumentality, is like these parts of yourself that you withhold from others are brought to the surface, even in their raw vulnerability and discomfort. But it's like once everybody sees everybody for all of their flaws, even, then there's no secrets left, and it's kind of like you just accept it. Everything's like one thing. It's just like, all right, I see you and understand you in your totality. That is what it is. And so it's kind of like it's I guess that's what they're going for with how those dark places in your heart are filled, those secrets and parts of yourself that you withhold from others. So maybe not a pleasant experience for someone going through the process of human instrumentality, but I guess after it's done, then you're at least like, all right, well, I can never be embarrassed again. I can never feel bad about myself again because everything's out there.
Yeah, everybody knows me on the same level that I know myself.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and at this point, I'm just like, I'm even more sitting here like, what is happening? Because this is Misato. That's without a doubt. This is Misato. This is not Shinji's interpretation of her. This is not someone else's thoughts. These are deep, dark secrets that she keeps from the world. But she's dead. So how is she in this thing, wherever this thing may be.
I think because she died as it was happening, which seems to be the suggestion, that she is looped in with it. Maybe she was still dying as it started, and so she still got swept up into it. That's my guess.
And Asuka's here too, which
Asuka was alive. Yep.
She was alive. Are we to assume that she's died and that's how she's in now? I just have so many questions. I'm like, if these don't get answered next episode, I'm gonna be very upset. I'm not gonna burn a building down.
Yeah. Everybody. I think everybody who's alive is swept up in instrumentality, and I think that Risuko is probably there because she died face down in the LCL, which is Lilith's blood. So if instrumentality is a return to Lilith and a return to one being, essentially, one consciousness, essentially, that she got swept up in that. And I think the explanation, this is all just complete speculation, but I think if Misato would have still been alive and maybe shot, but dying as it started, she might have gotten looped into it as well, even though she maybe by a matter of seconds would have died otherwise had it not started when it did. That's my guess. But it's left to be open to interpretation for sure.
So this is like the biblical, oh gosh, what's the name for it?
Are you talking about the rapture? Yep.
Okay.
To an extent, yeah. Definitely some parallels there. That seems to be kind of what instrumentality is drawing towards, except instead of going to heaven, you're going back to one thing. So you're losing that individuality, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And so as Misato is fighting back, still resisting these claims of kind of how she is, you mentioned earlier, she's kind of being confronted with, her love for Kaji being, it's kind of like, oh yeah, you saw in Kaji the traits and everything of your father, and you ran away. And they kind of addressed this through a slightly different version of that date night with Kaguya after the wedding. It wasn't a date night; it just kind of turned into one by the end, where she kind of acknowledges running away that's this episode, right? Everything is blurring together.
No, you're right.
Where everything, her running away was in part because she was happy, but she saw the thing, she saw those similarities, and it freaked her out, and she was like, because I'm happy, I have to run away because I'm running away from this. She's running away from these moments of captivating bliss, essentially. Mm-hmm. And I guess I could get into an extent of her feeling like she doesn't deserve them. Her being happy with Kaji despite knowing he's similar to her father, freaking her out more. And so the voice is kind of alluding to this idea of almost it's almost how you wish your father could see you. Now we're getting weird. Let's move on to the next case study or something here. Do you have something to add on to that?
Yeah, so let's see.
I guess we could dive into Kaji's, what he actually says here a little bit. I have this specific quote if you want it.
Is it that you want to engage in cheap thrills thing, or is it a different one?
No. So that conversation between Kaji and Misato, she's holding back tears and she basically is asking him to make her filthy, mess her up. He points out that she's just trying to hurt herself because she hates who she is at this moment. So a good quote from I think it's it's that book Wallflower. I don't remember the entire title, but the quote I'm thinking of is the
Perks of Being a Wallflower.
Yes, we accept the love that we feel we deserve, and so she, hating herself in this moment, doesn't feel that she's worthy of more, and so she's make me filthy, make me almost degrade me. Essentially, is kind of seemingly what she says, and I think the reason this feels strange from Misato as a character a little bit is we've only ever seen her with Kaji, and then there was even an episode that seemed to indicate that he was the only man she'd ever been with. But all of these thoughts and everything seem to allude as if she's had a very promiscuous life beforehand. And maybe that happened somewhere in that, but that still would conflict with her telling Kaji that he's the only one she's ever laid with like that. But then maybe you're splitting hairs there, and it's where it was more than just a hookup or something. I don't know. That was kind of my confusion on this, was I'm you feel you're really beating yourself up when you've only been with the one guy and it's the guy you love and would be with in any other world that's not like ending right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's I don't really know what to take off of like her perception of like filthy and dirty. It's like I definitely don't think it's like slutty as much as that's normally how we would portray it as like, oh, you sleep with a lot of people or blah 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 blah. And her fear, her like running away from that relationship, I do feel was solely based off of the relationship with her father. That it's like
Yes.
in accepting Kaji and loving him, that's her having to accept and love her father because she can see those parts of him that share those similarities. But in an effort to not do that, because she does still have so much hatred, she wants to run away from him because in a way that keeps her from having to like feel that acceptance towards her father and like almost like keep that hate that she's been hanging on to throughout her life.
Yeah, for sure. Because even as she's like hearing him say all this, she's like, you're just telling me to take care of myself. All men are like that. And then they just go off and get lost in their work, which is like, Kaji kind of did that. So I thought that was an interesting, very much projection or equivalence on her point where she's just like, well, my father did that, and you kind of do that too. So I'm just gonna say like that's how all men are, or whatever. They tell you to take care of themselves, but then they continue to like not be there for you, essentially. And little Misato acknowledges like, yeah, father was just like that. And adult Misato then is saying that like that men are just avoiding the harsh reality, life's nastiness. And then she kind of turns that back on herself, which I think is just kind of the sign of her mental health, and the effect of it is like, but it's almost like asking like, but why are they like that? She's like, oh, is it me? Well, of course it's me. I'm atrocious in every way. Like, who could blame them? Like, instead of actually like holding them accountable to their own decisions, she has to make it of like being a consequence against herself because she views herself so negatively. So yeah, definitely a lot to unpack there. A little bit of it doesn't quite match up with what it sounds like they're intimating just on what we've seen. But yeah, there's a lot there. And, you know, we kind of get these cuts then where after she's like, well, yeah, I'm atrocious. Who could blame them? She recalls Shinji pulling away from her touch. She recalls other people calling her indecent or inappropriate or whatever. Like, she sees like, this is how people think of me and view me. And so, yeah, I must be this thing. I must be a terrible person, or I must be a harlot or whatever, you know, like whatever indecent thing that they think I am. So she's just taking for fact what she feels like others see her as. And it's kind of an interesting idea as well. The idea that like, you know, there's a version of yourself that exists within their minds, but you just naturally accept those as truth, even over what you yourself feel, because you've alienated from your own inner self. The layers of Evangelion are obscene. Like, if you want to like actually boil down to all this stuff, it's like, oof, that's like a novel just on that one hang up or issue.
Yeah. So we get into Asuka's stepmom next, is that correct?
Yes.
Like glazing over anything?
I mean, just the last thing on the Misato thing is just like her talking about her true self, kind of wanting to be sullied, asking if she's happy. She tries to defend it several times before collapsing, admitting she's not. She's just trying to convince herself that she is and present herself, present that as her real self, like as if she is happy. Shinji then appears and asks how someone could go through life by that, followed by others asking if she feels alone unless she's sleeping alongside someone else. And she's still kind of pushing back. So then we get case 2 of Asuka, where we kind of glossed over Asuka, not we, the show. Like the little snippet we got of Asuka earlier was really brief, I felt like initially, so I'm glad they circle back here and explore her more.
Yeah, and we got to see how sweet her stepmom is. Really a loving and caring parent. She's getting into a conversation with Asuka's father, saying that she essentially didn't agree to be a mother, that Asuka is unapproachable, and then kind of seeking like an agreement from him. You know, she's like, Haven't you noticed that Asuka's like kind of an awful bitch?
Yeah.
She's like, right, and he's like, yeah, I don't really feel like that about my daughter, but
Which is actually good on him, because I assumed he was a horrible father before, so maybe he's not completely horrible.
yeah, let's not kick that out of the running. I don't think he's doing anything.
At least this one
great.
little piece of evidence is slightly in his favor.
Yeah, and so that conversation is, and then it goes on to I think where she says, "Well, you know, you're always her father, but I can really stop being her mother whenever I feel like." Which, boy, if that doesn't paint a very clear picture of how much of an awful, horrible piece of shit this lady is, she suck.
I wrote in my notes. I just wrote like, "What a total bitch."
Yeah,
I was like, that's like the worst thing you can say. And I assume little Asuka is like eavesdropping on this conversation the whole time, because the shot is just her with like a slow camera pan, as if she's like listening to this conversation in the next room.
And I think we get, maybe we've hit on this before, maybe it's been in the episode and I've overlooked it, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is the first time we really get an understanding of the mom's mental break. Now, we did hear the conversation between her dad and this other woman, but I don't...
The eventual stepmother, yes.
Yeah, the eventual stepmother, but this is the first time that her mom says really why she's feeling the way she is, which is that daddy doesn't love us, daddy loves some other woman, so that's why she killed herself. She killed herself because he was having an affair, most likely. At least, you know, on an emotional level, and then, you know, is so distraught over that she feels that, you know, Asuka's kind of tied into that, which in a way, maybe she is. He definitely, based on who Asuka's become and the level of care that he has provided for her, I don't think she was very well taken care of as a child, or when she was going through the things she was at Nerve.
Yeah.
So I think that was like her mother's psychotic, I guess psychotic might not be the, you know, mental break. Psychological break, as far as like almost trying to protect her. So even though to us it seems like a horrible thing that she's doing, like trying to kill her daughter, I think in her mind at the time, being in that state, she was like, well, I want to protect you from the harm that he's doing to both of us.
Yeah.
And that's when she finds her hanging corpse and smiling like a crazy person.
Yeah, and we get a little more of Asuka's kind of perception of that. First, we see the shot with the doll with its head ripped off, like decapitated. And so, like, that was the idea, because it acknowledges, like, yeah, the mother this whole time thinks the doll is Asuka and thinks Asuka is just another little girl. And so the doll being beheaded, it's kind of like, oh, so the mom thought she did that, and then she went and killed herself afterwards. And that's how Asuka had to find her. And she talks, like, actual Asuka is talking about, yes, that smiling expression, and how much she hated it, because she doesn't want to die. She doesn't want to fade away and disappear. She doesn't want boys in romance. She doesn't want anyone, because no one cares about her or will protect her. And that's like, man, that's why I said, like, everybody, if you think about Asuka's life in like a total picture, as horrible and obnoxious as Asuka is, when you look at her life in like this broad view, you're like, every step of the way, people failed her, let her down, whether it was just something of like a simple inability to see past her like rough edges or whatever, or whether it was like more direct, like I think Misato fails her spectacularly. And yes, it's largely because of Misato's own hangups, but at every level, people failed Asuka throughout her life, and so she just feels like she has nobody, and that's what's spurred so much of this breakdown for herself. Then the last thing she had was being an Ava pilot and being the best, and so when that starts to get taken away from her, she just loses all sense of self and worth and everything, and then that tanks the sync rate, and then it's like, I've got nothing left. I have no one who I feel like cares about me, who will protect me. Every relationship that I cared about has either abandoned me. Again, she thinks Shinji, who she did have a thing for a little bit, is more interested in Rei. She presented that as much in like episode 22 or 23. That assumption that like they're hitting it off and that they're much closer. And so she, at every level, feels rejected, abandoned, and isolated.
Yeah.
It's actually, I think, in some ways, the most tragic character in Evangelion, even though she's also the most abrasive.
It's definitely sad. She's definitely had a terrible past, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and she's asked, like, what do you wish for? And, you know, again, we get the little Asuka talking about to live for herself because she doesn't want, but she doesn't want to because it's so painful. She doesn't want to be alone. And that's kind of the contrasting thing there. Like, the thing you want is not the thing that you can take, essentially. And then we get Misato and Shinji on either side of her. And Shinji says, don't abandon me. Misato says, don't cast me aside. Asuka says, don't leave me alone. I've seen a dub, though, where Asuka says, don't kill me.
My dub that I was watching was don't kill me.
I wonder if I saw the caption and I took that. I like don't leave me alone better. Because don't kill me feels like such an extreme jump. The don't abandon me, don't cast me aside, don't leave me feel like they're following a similar trajectory that all will meet in the middle. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think the parallel thing that's kind of going for there works. The don't kill me. So maybe that's what it is. I saw the caption and thought that's what it said. Because, you know, like you said, you're pausing and like taking notes, taking exact quotes, whatever. And the captions can differ pretty significantly.
No, I switch back and forth all the time, so that wouldn't surprise me.
I
was watching that on my phone like however long we've been doing this. Just before I was watching like the tail end for the second time.
Yeah. Yep. So they're on the stage at this point, and this is where we see Shinji in two places. Asuka is also behind them, and they're kind of like looking at themselves on the stage. It's like the projections of human instrumentality, I guess. And Misato is kind of explaining this to Shinji. And at this point, I just started taking everybody's quotes, like everybody. I started writing everything because like it's just a blitz of like,
because
here's
it's confusing as shit. Yeah,
I can run through this whole spiel.
Please
and then we can do it. Okay, Asuka. This is Asuka's quote. I'll lead off with the name of who says what. Asuka. The truth is something we might not ever know. Risuko. But what you're experiencing right now is nothing more than facts. Rei. Valid within you. So basically piggybacking off of Risuko's thing. Fuyusuki. And the memory of those facts translates to become your reality. Risuko. Some truths will transform with the passage of time. Shinji. These are facts? These are all the results? These are all... He kind of trails off. Asuka interjects. Among the multitude of facts that exist, this is one set. Misato. And this is the result you wished for. So here's where we're getting the explanation of what's happening here. Shinji asks, I wished for this? Rei answers, yes, you wished for destruction, a world where no one is saved. Shinji tries to push back, says, no, it's just a world where no one saves me. And Risuko picks up, no one can save you. Then Kaji appears for the first time, a projection of Kaji. This is what you wished for, what you wanted. Asuka says, the destruction, the death, the return to the void. These are the things you wished for. Misato says, this is reality. Shinji asks, what is reality? Which that kind of feels like a fair question at this point. What is reality even more? Rei says, a reality is your world. The guy in the command center with the glasses says, it's your own world that you share with others in time and space. The long-haired guy from the command center then says, it's the world where you decide how you accept things, how you recognize things. Then you get the girl, the cute mousy girl or whatever from the command center saying, right now, it's your own world where you just receive what others give. Then you get a message on screen. This is reality. Picks up then with Misato. It's your own world where you can't do. It's your own world that you can't do anything about. Shinji says it's a world where everything, is decided for me, right? Risuko says, no, it isn't. It's a world where you decide. I can't tell who this next person is because they're not on screen as they're saying it, and I couldn't quite place the voice. It's a world where your heart decides the way that things will be. Again, this is reality. Rei says the will to live, the desire to die, those are the things you wished for, which is what I was saying earlier. Shinji, this darkness, this haphazard world, you're saying that this is what I wished for? Rei's like, yep, that's right. Kaji's like, you wish to be closed off from the world that's uncomfortable for you and only you. So you want to basically be like separated off from all the discomforts of the world around you and placed in a space where you're like protected essentially from it. The guy from the glasses says, so that you could protect your frail heart. Long hair guy says, so that you could protect your pleasure. Command Center girl says, this is the natural result. Then we go back to Misato, who says, people can't live in a realm that's closed off, in a world that's yours alone. Asuka jumps back in, but you wished for the world around you to be closed off, removed. Risuko says, rejecting what you disliked, removing all discomfort, your own heart yearned for a lonely world. Rei then answers, those desires created this tiny world of tranquility of the heart just for you. Asuka, but what's been shaped here is only one possible ending. Misato, this is the end of the world that you yourself brought about. And then the text on screen says, and so the quest for human instrumentality continues. Going into the final episode. So what we can derive from this, the simplest thing, the immediate thing is, even though Gendo is the one who had this plan and was directing all of this stuff, for whatever reason, Shinji is the one driving instrumentality. I have no idea why or how that's happening, but that's what's happening apparently. Shinji, and it's unclear, and Shinji's not even clear, was this a conscious wish? Was this something that he was like presented with and was like, yeah, do this? Or was this just like, hey, he killed Kaoru, and killing Kaoru and maybe Kaoru dying in the LCL, I don't know if that factors into anything, but like, it's almost like, okay, this last thing that had to happen happened, and now we're going to look inside your own heart, and even what you might not realize is the wish we're going to grant, the thing you don't know you want, almost.
Yeah, I took it more of like, the Matrix, where they're talking about, I feel like I've referenced the Matrix a couple of times recently. The Matrix, where they're talking about that most people that are plugged into the Matrix would choose the Matrix even if on an unconscious level. And I took it like that, like he's made this decision maybe in his mind or a thought, or maybe he hasn't, and it's being forced upon him like, hey, we know you thought that one time, so this is what we decided to do for you. But I'm still so utterly confused about where we are, how these people that are in this together.
We are in the soup of human consciousness that's being created by human instrumentality, and because Shinji is apparently the vehicle for this, we're seeing largely these people in Shinji's mind, if that makes sense. So it's like the reality he created, there's the projections of others that are from his mind, but then like the actual people are there as well, which is how you have moments where like Asuka could be in two places at once or whatever. And so like, yes, everybody is having to fill these dark spots kind of within each other's hearts and everything. But like all of this derived from Shinji somehow. However, Shinji was made to be the vehicle for this. It's like, this is what he created. This is what it's almost like, think like Ghostbusters 2. It's almost like you get to decide like what the method is essentially, and you get the Stay Puft Man or whatever. It's kind of like that, where it's like the outcome is going to be the outcome, but somebody gets to choose like the method. And for whatever reason, Shinji was able to be the one who chose the method. And so like all of this stuff, the stage, all of this is like within his mind. And then the lines are blurring as all of this breaks down in instrumentality is being carried out.
So confused.
You're not alone. I'm still confused by it, and I've seen it multiple times. There's elements of it that I'm like, okay, I get that. Yep, I can see where they're going with. That's interesting insight. And then there's other things where I'm like, in a literal sense, trying to make sense of some of these things gets very complicated. So, yeah,
Well,
we know
I do
things
feel
are.
like Gendo is still. See, and this is where I'm even more lost, is that we see a snippet of Gendo, like with his glasses on, like he's watching all of this happening
Mm-hmm.
from the outside.
We got another episode. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh boy. Oh boy.
Yep. We've got the finale of the series left, and if you thought this was weird and abstract, oh boy, this is polished. This is like detailed. If you think that, so we're
if you watched this last episode,
uh-huh.
not the one we just watched, the next one,
26,
and they were just like, "That's the end," how would you have felt?
If there was never an Evangelion again,
would you have set fire to a building?
I would not have set fire to a building, but I definitely, when I first watched the series, before I even watched End of Evangelion, I did like out loud say, "What the fuck was that?" Because I was like, that was interesting, but like I wanted to know all of this, and it felt like we were building towards this, and then we don't get that, and so it's confusing. And so I understand the frustration from fans because there were no plans for the End of Evangelion. This was the hand that was forced by the fan base because there were literal death threats. There was vandalism at Anno's studio. I think there were a couple instances where someone like tried to set fire to the building, like insane shit. And so because of that, people say like, "Hey, Anno eventually gave people the End of Evangelion," but so the last two episodes are the different direction that Anno kind of decided to take it, because initially when he finished episode 24, he felt like he had already kind of said everything he wanted to say. He had answered the questions he wanted to answer, and he didn't really want to keep, like, he was on the hook essentially for 26 episodes, but the production process wasn't a budget problem. That's a very popular theory that's come out. I used to subscribe to it as well, but there's been plenty I've seen since then that has said like, no, it wasn't really budget, but time constraints were definitely a factor to it. He kind of had a firm grasp on the series, especially between episodes 6 and 19. And then after that, the process was kind of condensed. Like there were still good ideas, there were still things like that, but they were suddenly rushed, which is why we talked about later episodes being so dense with like lore and answers, things that didn't have breadcrumbs set, but suddenly you were just like having everything dumped on your plate and you just had to like take it and go. Mm-hmm. And so these last two episodes, he decided he wanted to go a different direction. Initially, he was talking about literally just like coming out like on the stage, essentially like a production stage, and like talking about like some of these things, the psychoanalysis elements, because while he was working on the series, he was actually going through his own severe depression. And why these sort of psychoanalytical things become more prevalent as the show goes on is because it's kind of his own, I don't want to say like it's him like working through his depression, but it's kind of coming to understand it a little better. And so like that's how these characters suddenly start getting more depth and more unique to them as they go through that. And so for these last two episodes, because he wasn't from a lore perspective that interested in doing much more, it made sense to him to go almost with like an experimental film type approach where he would delve into the characters, but instead of him just laying it out on like talking to the camera, essentially, he's like, all right, I'll depict it, but I'm going to depict it in an abstract, almost metaphysical way, kind of like we've done in past episodes, but turn that up a notch. That was how he originally envisioned ending it. It was not budgetary limitations that forced them to do that. But the fan base was understandably pissed off. That's not what they wanted. So even though he wanted to be a subversion of the mecha anime, essentially, it didn't sit well that it didn't boil to the kind of confrontation or conflict at the end that people expected. And so you got all these angry threats and death threats and vandalism and people setting fire to the studio like at different times, like pissed off. And so what we eventually get with the End of Evangelion comes out about a year and a half later, comes out in 1997, same year as Perfect Blue, which means that was a hell of a year for anime in Japan, animated films. there are some people who say, like, to an extent that the end of Evangelion movie is Anno's own revenge against his fan base. And it's just like, oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. It's still like an amazing movie. So your revenge is incidentally what people wanted, just intense, I guess. So yeah. This last episode, we're gonna get even more experimental. I'll tell you that. We go more, like I talked about, him trying to almost like deconstruct his own relationship with his growing fan base is like low key explored. So episode 26, it'll be interesting. And then I assure you, what we build to with the end of Evangelion will give you that resolution of whatever you were wanting to see. You will see, but it's going to be it's going to be something that for people at the time, yeah, I get it. If this was, you asked me earlier, like, if I only got those 2 episodes and there was nothing else, would I have like been happy with it and like considered it a favorite anime of mine and revisited it? Probably not revisited it. I might have looked at it and said, like, man, this thing had so much potential. It was really good, but it just ends on such like a wet fart, essentially. Like, what do you do with that, you know? But like I said, having said all that, I do have an appreciation for these last 2 episodes, but it was not there initially. I had to like watch everything, and then when I came back and revisited it, I was like, okay, because I got what I wanted, I can look at what you wanted initially with your presentation, and I can say, like, I appreciate what you're going for, and I see some of the depth you wanted us to take away from it. But if it was all there was, I think I would have been a little more hard pressed to like really tout this as one of my favorite series and stuff like that. So it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't. You stick to your vision, you stick to your guns, and sometimes it works out. For a series like Breaking Bad, was hell bent on only being the 5 seasons, and they got the whole way through. The critical acclaim, people love the ending generally. That worked out. But in Anno's case, this being where he wanted to take it, it was not well received, and he had to kind of like soft retcon his own ending. Although there are pieces you can find in there, again, these glimpses of reality that come through that will mirror in some respect to things we see. So it's interesting. It's a really, they're polarizing episodes, these last 2, but I think they're also worth watching because they give you not just an ending, as they said themselves in this episode, but they give you like the clear idea of what Anno's original vision was. So,
yeah, that's. I kind of want to know, which I feel like maybe we need to dive into this after we watch End of Evangelion.
Yes.
And I can't do it. Whatever. It's not happening today. Evangelion. Thank you. So I do want to talk about what is my expectation? What do I want? And I don't know what I want. I don't know what I really would have wanted out of a finale. I definitely don't think I'm going to get something I was expecting, but I don't know what I was looking for. And I feel that so many of these characters we've like killed almost, like whether they're, actually dead or they're just
broken.
Like Asuka is so broken, it's like she's an almost nothing character at this point, which is why I think it'd be so awesome to see that like battle that I had in my mind where she's like fighting tooth and nail to like the last instant.
That would be awesome.
Or even if like, this episode was just showing, the first part of that, and then she rises up and defeats Rei or whatever the situation is and frees everyone, gets the spear. I don't know what the hell would happen, but I would be like Game of Thrones final episode excited about that.
A redemption arc would be really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's fair. I think what fans wanted to see was this struggle against whatever was coming, whatever if instrumentality is being enacted, obviously we expect to see the start of that and like the fight against it. And so I think that's why the frustration is there, because we just jump into like, oh, we're kind of already in it. And then you don't really see the breaking free sort of thing. It's almost like we're resolving on like this understanding of the self. And it's like, that's cool in a metaphysical way, but like, that's not what, like, people want to see that carried out through like real world physical actions, not in this very metaphysical way of like an abstract, I guess. Like you said, we get those glimpses of reality. We want to see that play out. We want to see Asuka rising from the ashes, fighting through everything she's gone through to find that sense of self-worth and purpose and meaning. That's what we want to see, but we're not in this episode, at least, seeing it in like play out physically. And so that's the point of frustration. I think the fan base largely had, is just like not enough answers of what's happening in the real world. We just get these glimpses, and they're like, these are enticing things like, oh shit, Risuko's dead. Oh shit, Misato's dead. Asuka's at the bottom of this lake. Like, but we're like, what's happening around it? How did we get here? How did these moments happen? And then what's the fallout from them? But we just see like, oh, instrumentality is continuing. Like, I need to know more. And it's kind of ambiguous. And so that's the point of frustration. So I get it. I do. I think you just want to see, that physical fight and resistance. And I'll say this much. I want to see what happened with those mass-produced Avas. We kept talking about them, how they were going to be like 12 or 13, whatever Avas. I want to see that. That was a big plot point towards the end, and we never got to see anything. So I assume they're out there. So, yeah.
This feels like one of those, and I don't know what's going to happen in next episode. At this point, I could just throw gum at the wall and hope it sticks. The thing, I don't even know where I was going to go with that. It feels like this is going to end up being like a movie where the bad guy wins. Spoil Arlington Road. Like, he gets there, the bomb goes off, bad guy wins, good guy loses.
Yep.
And I think
good movie.
that if it does end like that, I always respect those type of decisions, and sometimes it does fly. It flies better than others. Like one of my favorites, that the studio pressure stopped from happening, and it pisses me off because Christian Bale.
Oh
no, Terminator Salvation. Do you know about this?
Yep. I know that one.
Yeah. So for anyone that doesn't. If you haven't watched Terminator Salvation or feel the need to for some reason, spoiler alert ahead, but when Christian Bale signed on to the movie, the final scene is John Connor is actually dead, and Marcus Wright, who is this like robot half human, we get the whole episode, or the whole episode, the whole movie, says, hey, put John Connor's skin on my body. I'm going to lead the resistance. And they do. He is now a robot leading the human resistance. End of the movie, they're all at like a giant circle with all the most important people in the world at this time, all of the leaders, kills everyone at the table. Eye glows red, cut to credits. That is the fucking coolest ending I've ever heard. I get that it destroys the whole human race and any hope that you had that we were going to win.
Yeah.
But that is a badass way to end the series. Like, humans lose, machine wins.
Yeah.
Fuck you. That's awesome. I wish they would have done it. Gosh, it pisses me off that I even know it exists.
If they had at least like filmed it or whatever and had the alternate cut or something, right? Yeah, that would have been cool. Yeah, I was thinking like the I Am Legend thing where they completely ruined the ending of the original novella or whatever. The whole point is that he is like the legend, the monster of the vampire creatures, like lore. He's the boogeyman to them. Like, they have him kind of have this realization, and then they walk it back where it's like, oh, at the end he gave his life for this cure, and it's like, no, there is no cure. That's the whole point. is like the age of man ends. He has to realize that he is fighting for a way of life that can never be again. And that like he is the monster of their new growing world. They fear him. And it's like, he is the monster in this case, not them. He just views them as that because they are different from what he knows. And like, they completely botched that one, but at least they filmed that one. The Terminator one, I don't even think was filmed.
Well, even with that, they we're getting into some real Neon Genesis stuff here. Even with that, they Hollywooded that movie so much. It's like
They did.
the whole point of it is that the creatures, these like vampires, are essentially become almost human again.
Yeah.
Like to at pretty much as close as they can get. I'm sure there are some differences, but it's like this hatred that he's had for them from the way that they've started to where they ended up just continues. Like regardless of what he sees, they're always the enemy. So by the time everything is done, he's in captivity. It's like we already know that things have changed. Like they weren't able to even function as a society. Like they were rabid monsters and have now like have a civilization to where he's like in jail and you know the kids of the society are like looking upon him with like fear. And then there's this realization of like, oh my God, like I have been killing people thinking that they're like, you know, rabid dogs, whereas this is just the new world that I refuse to accept.
Yep, exactly.
But they didn't do their characters justice. I feel like no matter what the ending was, they didn't bring enough humanity to like where they ended up. We'll get into that in a different episode, not related to Neon Genesis.
Yeah. No, if anything, that's just making me want to do a deep dive of I Am Legend someday for Cheap Pop. But
we can do the old one too, Omega Man.
Sweet. But yeah, so we got one episode left of Neon Genesis Evangelion of the series. Then we got the End of Evangelion film. We're going to watch that and record next weekend. And then from there, we got the rebuilds, which we'll get into. But I'm looking forward to this next part. Like 26, yes, I'm interested in seeing that again and taking notes and talking about it. It's the End of Evangelion that I am like stoked for. That is to me like if I wanted to tell someone, you can't. That's the thing. You can't just tell someone like if you watch one piece of Evangelion media, it has to be this. Because you're not gonna know what the fuck is going on. It builds on the series. You're gonna be like, wait, what? Because it picks up straight away from the Kaoru death. Straight away. So like you have to know what took you to that point at least. But it's almost like because again it's like 86 minutes long. It's basically almost like it's the equivalent of if it were like a made for TV movie or like a 2-episode like conclusion to like rewrite 25, 26 almost. So it's not a alternate. It's like a soft retcon, but even within that, you can find like where you would say like, and pause, insert 25 and 26. Like those moments are there if you wanted to keep what you've established from those final 2 regular episodes. So it's like you got your made for TV ending and then you got your theatrical release ending almost.
It's amazing to me that anyone who is doing a show like this would have such like a negative fan reaction and then still down the road, regardless of the amount of like money that somebody probably had to give him, even to make the End of Evangelion and just be like, oh no, we need you to make like a fan movie. I'd be like, dude, no, they literally like set our offices on fire. I'm not making something for them. Yeah. Like I'm not going to fill your fucking need. You like treated me like I was a, worthless piece of shit. Yeah. And now you're just going to expect me to like, oh, well, we said bark, so bark. But I don't know. I feel like if I was a director doing that, I'd be like, no, fuck you. That's the end.
Yep. Like if you want to see my other work, you can do that, but I'm never coming back to this. I could totally understand that. Or if I came back to it, it'd be like 20 years later for like a one-off. And that would almost like be more motivated by the monetary pop, like the nostalgia pop for people like, oh, he's doing another Evangelion thing. I got to see it. But yeah, he started the rebuild series in 2007. So it was 10 years later. End of Evangelion's 97. He started rebuilds in 2007. So there was a gap. Maybe that gap was enough for him to move forward, but we'll get
I'd
into
love
that.
to see some like interviews or something too. That'd be something that
Yeah.
we should look into and just
Mhm.
fill the fans in, because I'd like to know where his state of mind was that he like accepted that type of thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I've done some digging on that, but yeah, we could definitely do a deeper dive sometime. But we've rattled on a long ass time on episode 25. I'm going to have some editing ahead of me to cut this shit down. But yeah, that is episode 25. These are our takes. You may think them cheap, but to you, we say, fuck you. It's our podcast. So extra snotty here today, I guess. I'm feeling the feistiness, but we will be back next week with episode 26, which is titled, I want to make sure I got this right because it's one of those interesting titles. Episode 26 is The Beast That Shouted I, as in self, I, at the heart of the world. Yup. Last installment of the series. And then we're going to get into straight run of movies from there. So stay tuned. We'll be back soon. Till then, I've been Derek.
And I've been Matt.
Till next time, guys.
Peace.